Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our wrestling podcast. Available on Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. So, without further ado, the following podcast is scheduled for one fall, and today's topic, Greatest Rivalries Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels.
Welcome to the O.W.P. This is our wrestling podcast. This is Dave along with Jess.
Hello, everybody.
And No Cuz this week, bringing you our perspective on the world of professional wrestling. No inside sources, no ties to the industry, just stories from the diehards, sharing opinions with you. And now on to our topic today, greatest rivalries, Shawn versus Bret. As always, you can reach us via Instagram at O.W.P 2019, SoundCloud at Our Wrestling Podcast, YouTube at Our Wrestling Channel, or just do the easy thing, download the app WrestlePost at no charge to you, and join us along with other great podcasts of the day. Jess, why are we talking about Bret and Shawn right now? What's going on?
Well, I'd like this to be the first of our series that we do of greatest rivalries. You know, everybody wants to talk about their Mount Rushmore of wrestling, or this person's great, or this wrestler's great, or this tag team's great. And that's fine. That's an easy conversation to have. You know, like everyone has, you know, top 5 conversations, top 10 conversations. We certainly do off the mic. But like wrestlers get famous as well because they get matched up with a good rival. And that rivalry is what people remember. You know, everybody remembers Steamboat and Flair, which we may cover in the future. Everybody remembers Hulk and Andre. Everybody remembers Hulk and Savage. You know, all these rivalries that stretch over time, you know, not just unfortunately nowadays it's hard to have a good rivalry because everything gets kind of reset every 30 days. You know, they hit a pay-per-view and then they reset and then they get ready for the next pay-per-view. And sometimes rivalries do stretch on every now and then in today's world. But back then, you know, it was some rivalries lasted years and years. And we're talking about Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, what's so unique about this rivalry is not only was it really good on our television screens and in front of the camera, it got really nasty and good, if you like that kind of drama, behind the curtain. These guys started getting a lot of tension. They really didn't like each other for a time period. And it caused problems. There was physical altercations between the two behind the scenes as well.
Unsafe work environment.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to cover, you know, obviously rivalries that are just kind of good in front of the camera as well. But I wanted to kick it off with this one because these guys this is special in a way. Like, they were really good together in the ring, in front of the camera. And like I said, behind the scenes, it got nasty for a long time.
Well, you had not to give too much away, just to kind of preset it, but you had the greatest technical wrestler in the world probably at that moment with probably actually the greatest bumper too, you know, the greatest seller. And Shawn was not, I mean, Shawn's obviously the latter, but Shawn was no technical, buffoon himself. He was actually really good at what he did in his craft. But he was known more for a bumper and selling, you know, I think, when he hit the spare part of his career, you know, the singles part of his career. But there's so many fascinating things to it. One of that is the outside drama, the non-kayfabe piece, the shoot piece. But I think even more fascinating is how it started. I think there's a lot of fans out there that might be younger than us. It's not a bad thing. You get, like, I think Jess has always said, you get in when you get in. You get hooked on how you get hooked, and that's a great thing no matter how it happens. I think a lot of people got hooked by the time when Bret and Shawn were hot and heavy as singles tags, but that's not how they came in to WWF at the time, Jess, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they were around, but Bret especially was around a long time ago. You know, he broke in like 1985 as far as WWF is concerned. He wrestled for Calgary Stampede, which was his father's promotion up in Canada before that. But to get to the national scene in the United States, you got to go to the WWF at one point. And he came in 1985, and they put him with Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and they formed the Hart Foundation early on.
World Wrestling Federation right now, Jimmy Hart, come on in. Honky Tonk Man, your Intercontinental Champion. Oh, yes. And from Reno, Nevada, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, the former football great from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Bret the Hitman Hart are the tag team champions of the world.
You know, the paper said, everybody says, the greatest team in the history of professional wrestling today. I guess you
Gosh, and I got to tell you, the Anvil has to be so, I mean, God rest his soul, right? But the Anvil has to be so thankful for that matchup. The Anvil was just nothing but a bruiser, and great on the mic, had a great look. But other than a bunch of atomic drops and back body drops, that's kind of where, in obviously lariats, that's where his talent kind of ends. He goes in there, roughs people up, and Bret really carries 90% of those matches. And they're one of the greatest tag teams of all time, right? And on that side of it, that's where Bret comes in. And it's funny because I think because Bret we'll talk about size later, because size really matters as why this rivalry comes into motion. The land of the giants kind of dissipates for an obvious reason that we'll talk about, but also, I think that's why Bret was put in a tag, because he wasn't big enough. But Bret by far could probably topple anybody in that locker room. Bret was probably the meanest guy in there as far as technical ability and what he could do to hurt people, because obviously his dad could stretch anyone, right? But I think he was taken for granted because it was the land of the giants. And that's why he's in that tag role, which develops into one of the greatest tag teams of all time. The other side is also a tag setup, but didn't quite reach those heights, right, Jess? We're talking about Shawn.
Yeah, Shawn comes in 88. I want to say late 88. I know there was a brief stint where they came in months before and they kind of got fired really quick. And then they ended up coming back in late 88, I want to say. And he came in with Marty Jannetty as the Rockers. And, I'm not here to bash anybody, but I never dug the Rockers. I liked what they did in the ring. They were high flyers. I didn't like a lot of the choreographed move, which unfortunately professional wrestling in 2020 is all about, synchronized moves and choreographed stuff. It looks like dance moves that you work with your partner with.
Flippies. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not saying wrestling in general was never that at its very core, but when you simulate violence, you make it look like you're not working with that person, but yet you are. However, to me, I was never a fan of that style of wrestling. So when the Rockers came in, I know they were the Midnight Rockers in the AWA before that, but I didn't watch a lot of AWA. When they came to the WWF, like they did elbow drops at the same time. They kicked at the same time. They did double hip tosses. I was never into that style of wrestling. I know a lot of people were.
I was just saying a lot of people were, yeah.
And they were innovative, for their time. I was not. I was a Hart Foundation guy. I was not a Rockers guy at all. That was just me.
Well, you were a Hart Foundation and a Demolition guy.
Yeah.
That's what was big at that moment. And there were a lot of fans, especially the ladies. The ladies really love the Rockers. They had those big blowouts and the flashy clothes, and they can get up top, they can get high, and they're more like regular dudes. They were big, but they weren't freaking massive, steroid junkie guys. That I hate to say it, a lot of women look at it and go, "Ooh, that's gross," but the Rockers, some of the women can get behind that. Kind of like Edge, I think at that time when he was with Christian. I mean, Edge and Christian was probably more Edge, but how do you make that joke? But they definitely. You want to talk about, like, Jess, you want to talk about bringing about a new fan base? The Rockers did that, right? The Rockers could bring about something that no other fan ever said, I'm going to watch that because of this. I think they brought new fans, especially the female fans.
People are saying that we've gone over that edge because we signed a match with the Colossal Connection. Well, Andre and Haku, life is no easy ride, and nobody knows that better than us. That's right, and all we ever wanted out of ourselves was to be the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions. And now we got the champions, but the only problem is not a title match. Why is that, Andre? Why is that?
They did. A lot of people were attracted, and wrestling's always been thought of as like a male-dominated, sport or form of entertainment.
Sure.
Which I get it, because there was really no up until the last 5 years, there was really no women's division to necessarily speak of, except for certain periods here and there. But the Rockers for sure. They brought in younger girls. Guys did like them. They just brought in a different style. They brought in a different style of tag wrestling and a different style of wrestling altogether. It takes all of it in one big pot to make the world go round. I understand that. They weren't my cup of tea.
And when you say too, Shawn was. I don't even think Shawn was technically even an adult when he first broke in. Wasn't he barely 17 or almost 18?
Maybe in the sport in general. In WWF, he was way over 18. I don't want to say way over 18.
But when he started, he was 17 years old.
Shawn was really young when he broke in.
Yeah, and he was barely. I mean, he was over 18 when he came in, but it wasn't that far fetched. I mean, Shawn was really young, probably one of the youngest people you'd bring in on that kind of level, and that's also probably why they never made it past really kind of mid card status, because you just don't know what you're dealing with that. And Marty Jannetty's kind of a wild card too. We can do a whole show on him. It's fascinating how many times he got fired and rehired, but it's incredible. That Shawn found his way in spite of all that, and he was super young kind of when it cleared, right? But even though Bret was being used sparingly in single matches at that time frame,
yeah, they would. Vince did always. I think he always liked Bret in the ring. It was weird, especially
it's hard not to, right?
With the way everything turned out, which I feel that Bret was not chosen in the long run. But back in the day, the whole was it Mike McGee? Isn't that wrestler's name? The one that they did the little documentary on the network where this guy came in, looked like $1 million.
Oh, and yeah.
They actually, of all people,
they put him up against Bret.
Yeah, they put Bret in there, and Bret was still with the Hart Foundation, and they did that. Bret also feuded with Bad News Brown after an altercation at WrestleMania 4 in 1988.
Hey, wait a minute. What's going on?
Oh, the hitman came out of nowhere. Don't ever double-cross the hitman. Look at this. He bent out of shape.
He's got the trophy. I don't believe it.
He's smashing it.
He's smashing the trophy.
Hitman smashing that 7-foot trophy.
Mainly because Bad News Brown or Bad News Allen wrestled for Stampede Wrestling, which was Bret's dad promotion. So Bad News Allen knew Bret. I think Vince wanted to he really had big plans for Bad News. It didn't end up panning out, but he really wanted Bad News to be like a hard-ass heel. Way ahead of his time, I think Bad News Brown's character was.
Yeah.
So when
a little too real, right?
When he brought Bad News in, he really wanted Bad News to get in there with somebody who he was familiar with, which would have been Bret, because again, Bad News Allen wrestled for Stampede Wrestling up in Calgary for Stu. So he knew the Hart family. So I think Bret, but it was always interesting to me that Vince would pull Bret out of the Hart Foundation here and there to do like a 4 or 5 month house show tour, loop, or whatever you want to call it, as a singles wrestler. And then he put him back together as Hart Foundation. Hart Foundation ended up winning 2 tag titles. The first one they won in 86 when they beat the British Bulldogs, and they won the second tag titles when they beat Demolition at SummerSlam 90. So
that's amazing, by the way.
The Hart Foundation, that's a fantastic match. The Hart Foundation was very decorated, whereas in contrast, the Rockers never really rose above mid-card status. I know there was that one event where they technically beat the Hart Foundation, but they never aired it because the ring broke and all that. But I don't know. People say that they were going to win it. Vince used to do a lot of stuff on house shows to see how the crowd reacted to things. I don't even know, even if that ring doesn't break, that they would have advertised Rockers as tag champions. I don't know that for a fact. I don't think so. I think Vince was just trying to see what stuck and what worked. I don't necessarily know, even if that ring doesn't break, that they air that and they showed it. Because Vince has done a lot of things like that, where he's put one person over in a house show. He didn't like the way it worked out, and then that's never happened. We're just never going to talk about
plans change, pal.
Yeah.
That's really it, and that's kind of where where it comes into play. I don't think you stumbled upon it, but I think you had me stumble upon it just by the way you're talking. I think it's absolutely fascinating that, even though, and I'll kind of jump into it briefly and we'll come back to it. If not for the steroid trial and all the craziness, Bret would have never had a shot at what we're talking about in these kind of rivalries and these kind of single matches. Even though Vince knew exactly what he was and what he was capable of in that ring, he never had the faith in Bret. And the only reason why he had the opportunities because Vince had no choice.
Bottom line is Vince always catered to and nurtured dollars. And even though he respected,
brought dollars.
Yeah, even though, exactly, because the average wrestling fan could look at that giant and be like, I'm not that size. I'm not that kind of imposing figure. Whereas, like,
it's a carny spectacle, right?
Wrestling has to be so good that you don't think, like, nobody looks at wrestling and goes, I like that guy because I can't fight like him. right? Like nobody looks at wrestling like that. The casual wrestling fan doesn't look at wrestling and they don't get attracted to wrestling going, man, that guy's a really good wrestler. He makes me jealous because I wish I was him.
Yeah, those are the diehards and they're few and far
Maybe,
between.
and that's only if you're diehard and you've been a wrestling fan for years and you learn how the inside works. The average wrestling fan is going to be attracted to the Hulks, to the Austins, the larger than life characters with the bald heads or the yellow tights or the tan muscles, and that and the 6'5", 6 foot, whatever. And I'm not saying that people that were 6 foot didn't get over, like Macho was like 6'1". Or something like that. I'm just saying, like, Macho had a unique character. I don't want to get off on a tangent, on a side note, but like Vince always chased the money. That was always the rule in the WWF. So unfortunately, he looked at good technical wrestlers as, well, you're just the guys that are going to be grinding it out on my house shows.
You're a worker, yeah.
Yeah, putting other people over, making sure the big guys, the big tan golden gods, get put over. That's just what that.
You're gonna carry 18 to 20 minutes, but the last 2 minutes, Hulk's gonna.
And Vince never saw any more value in those guys. He respected them. A lot of people don't think that Vince respects actual wrestlers. He absolutely does, 100%. But he's not going to push them. They so matter. Like these technical wrestlers so matter. But when you get two technicals at the top, it's pretty phenomenal to see. It's just at that time, like you said, the casual viewer wasn't going to watch that, but the diehard just absolutely eats it up. It's amazing. It's just different. And that's kind of, I don't want to fast forward too far. I kind of want to kind of get into where the single stuff happens. So basically. The Hart Foundation loses the tag team titles to the Nasty Boys at WrestleMania 7, and that clears Bret into his single career. And obviously, the Rockers never rose above mid-card status like we talked about. And then Bret actually wins the IC title from Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam in 91. And then we lead into one of the, in my opinion, I thought it was one of the coolest mic segments I've ever seen. Like the live segments. You got Piper's Pit, you've got all these other ones. But this happens to be at the what do we call it? Just call it the barbershop, right? Yeah.
And they call it the glass window segment. Jess, can you describe what we're talking about?
The way that Brutus Beefcake came back for a while in 92 and he did what was called, it was like a takeoff on Piper's Pit or the Brother Love Show. It was called the barbershop. So every week, it was a set with the red carpet and a fake glass barber window, with the barber, the stripe pole and all that stuff. And he had a barber's chair in there and, it looked like a barbershop on the inside. So he would have guests on every week. It was a talk show. So they had been teasing the Rockers having problems for like 3 months leading up to it. And it just seemed like Rockers, they would get title shots like at LOD. And then like, because of a miscommunication, one Rocker would actually hit the other and then LOD would win. Or they would do a singles match. And then because the other Rocker would come down with the good intention of helping that other Rocker out, but it inadvertently caused a distraction and then the other guy to go, to lose. And so that was the problem. So they were teasing a Rocker breakup the whole time. Well, in wrestling, if they telegraph it, it's going to happen, even though people didn't really want it to. And so basically they had kind of Shawn having a bad attitude and Marty kind of being like, what's wrong with you, man? What's wrong with you? So they had the culmination of it all was on the barbershop in early 1992. And Beefcake had both the Rockers on and he was addressing, you guys have not been on the same page lately. What's going on? Are you guys going to break up? Are you going to get back together? So of course they did a whole thing where Shawn's like, I'm sorry, I've been an arrogant jerk. And Marty's like, yeah, man, what's wrong with you? Like, we're the Rockers, dude. We're rocking and rolling and blah, blah, blah. So they kind of seemed like they were cool. And then they shook hands and they hugged and the Rockers music played and Brutus Beefcake's like, ladies and gentlemen, the Rockers, they're fine, they're back together, nothing was ever wrong. And then Shawn Michaels super kicks Marty Jannetty in the face and then picks him up and throws him through the glass barbershop window, which was fake glass, but at the same time that was pretty violent for a WWF program. WWF was
for
very,
the family and friends.
It was very bubblegum at the time, and he threw them.
That's like a Saturday morning when you see that too. It's not like on primetime or anything, if I recall.
It was either on, I don't know if it was on Superstars or on Wrestling Challenge. One of the
Even if it was on primetime, they aired it over and over on Saturday and Sunday mornings.
Tag team specialist.
See, one without the other isn't any good. Oh, I knew he was going to do that. I just knew he was going to do that. He don't need Jannetty. I told you that off and on.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was.
No! Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was shown everywhere. And so that was like, oh my God. So Shawn turns heel and launches a single career, much like Bret sort of unceremoniously became a single star. He, the Hart Foundation lost to WrestleMania 7, like Dave said. Then all of a sudden you just started seeing Bret on TV tapings as a singles wrestler, beating people. He came up with this new move called the sharpshooter, and he started using it to beat people. And Anvil I can't remember if he got fired, he got injured, something, whatever. Anyway, so
More than
Bret
likely
was
he
like
having some trouble.
Yeah, Bret was, the focal guy. Vince always liked Bret anyway. And then Bret got the big match against Mr. Perfect, had an amazing match with Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 91. Go watch it. And becomes IC champion. So Bret was off to the races already at this time. And then Shawn Michaels comes along, and then just Vince saw something in Shawn, always has, and figured, I got to break up the Rockers. I need some more single star, because at the time, he was looking, before the steroid trial forced all the big guys out, they were getting old as well. Hulk was getting old and tired. So was Savage, as far as their characters were concerned. And so Vince is like, I need some fresh blood. So he pushed it. And this shocking scene on the barbershop catapulted Shawn and at least gave him a great start.
By the way, I can't think of another time before where Shawn actually did a super kick, even in a match. I mean, they were all high flyers, and it was all very.
They would do it every. They would do like double super kicks and stuff, just really fluffy shit. But Shawn kind of dusted it off.
But this was laid in.
At first, actually, Shawn's finisher was not the super kick. He would do the super kick as a setup, and then he did like this odd, like back over the back suplex move. It was weird. He would grab them from behind the opponent, like through their crotch area, and then grip his hand with his other hand and back suplex them. It was very odd. It was a very odd finisher. He did that for more than a few months when he first turned heel, but the setup was always a super kick. I don't really remember when he started developing the super kick as his finisher, but it was, I want to guess it was probably sometime in 93.
Isn't that amazing when you think about that? That's incredible.
Yeah, his finisher that everyone knows him for now, the super kick, was actually set up for this shitty suplex he used to do. And then after a while, he bailed on it, and he's like, fuck it, I'm just going to do the super kick.
Yeah, I'm going to have to push a little bit through this, but I got to tell you, as they start rising through the ranks in 92, and I know we talked about amid the steroid scandal in 92, Bret actually defeats Ric Flair in October of that year to win the WWF title, and then Shawn defeats the British Bulldog in a Saturday Night's Main Event for the IC title. They actually wrestle at a Survivor Series, as both champions. I don't think it was a title for title, Jess. You can correct me on that.
No, it was not, but it was the first time, since we're talking about the rivalry, that they actually fought. And
this is amazing to me when you think about it. I think they wrestled as a tag team, right? But it was like house shows sparingly. This is the first time they faced off mano a mano.
Yeah, and they were both like, again, at the end of 92, shit was in shambles as far as like major stars and
this is like names. Throw them together. We don't have anybody
so Vince
else.
Was like just trying to get new talent pushed really quick and get all the obvious steroid guys out of the picture. So Hulk kind of defected. He left, and Savage Vince didn't want in the ring anymore. Bulldog got suspended because he failed the drug test. Warrior got suspended because he failed the drug test. And wanted more money and all that good stuff. So like it was just a whole, even further than that, Warrior came back after that, and then he left because he failed the drug test. So like it was very odd. It was a very odd time in wrestling. Wrestling was so different at the beginning of 92 than it was at the end of 92, especially in the WWF. It's like night and day, the two. So at the end of 92, Vince was kind of on his ass as far as like the rock and wrestling area was over and it was coming down hard. And so he had to not only push new talent, but it couldn't be overly big guys because again, he didn't want any heat of that guy's on steroids, so Vince was already going through the ringer here with the whole steroid trial. It was all the accusations were coming out at late 92.
It was a super tough time for wrestling. I mean, you have what, like a 3-year gap between here and the Monday Night Wars, maybe more. What was it, 94, 95? When did it start?
Monday Night Wars started in 95.
So yeah, you literally have a 3-year gap between
at this point in Survivor Series 92, Raw hadn't even started yet, and so like they.
Yeah, that's right. Raw was kind of a necessity.
They rushed the world title on Bret, which a topic for another podcast because I totally disagree with the way they did it. Michaels also comes into his own, beats the guy who beat Bret for the IC title.
Yeah, that's right.
And so so now they're primed together, and then Vince is like, just put them together in the main event for the world title at Survivor Series 92, and they tore the house down. And this is a very good match. I would say, out of the matches that they had. and they had 3 top profile matches. We'll get to the other 2 later. I would say the Survivor Series 92 match, which unfortunately their fitting end would come to an end at a Survivor Series later, years later. But it started at a Survivor Series in 92, and they had a fantastic match. And Michaels was coming to his own and trying to figure out what kind of a heel he was going to be. Bret was just thrust into the world title picture and trying to become this face, and he wasn't as charismatic as Hulk or Macho or any of those guys, but Vince was desperately trying to get something to click. But you know what? We win as wrestling fans because it was a great match in Survivor Series 92. Great match.
Because Shawn Michaels has really taken it to the Hitman Bret Hart, and I'm not so sure it's because of the ability of Shawn Michaels or whether or not it's because of the record-setting pace.
This is it.
For the Hitman.
This is it, pal.
Did you see that? Did you see that? Yes. No. The sharpshooter, can he do it?
No, it's not on the shit. No, it's not on the shit. Don't give up.
It's going to be over.
Don't give up.
He did it again. The Hitman Bret Hart, victorious. He's still
Yeah. Once the bell rings, man, you can call off everything else and just kind of enjoy what's going to be in there. So, yeah, and that's kind of what we get to, and that's where Vince has to rely on more technical. And I think your point, Jess, is the non-giant, non-muscular talent to carry on the company, because you know that Bret and Shawn, quite frankly, they're just, you know, they're not on the juice. If they are, they're masking it pretty well, and they're smaller guys. You know, we know that. And they would use that 2-year stint, basically 93 to 95, to develop those characters. And they are the mainstays. They're the top tier. They're the top angles and matches. And it's quite interesting. You know, we're getting into, I know Bret carried the title into WrestleMania 9, and they tried a little bit with Hogan on that crazy fit. You know, we're not going to talk about too briefly, where basically Yokozuna cheats to win Bret, but Hogan wins it back like in 2 minutes. But that failed. That failed hideously. People were tired of it. And basically Bret goes on and wins that title for a second time at WrestleMania 10 a year later. So they used Yokozuna. I think that's a big deal. Yokozuna carried that title for almost an entire year, you know, and Bret actually beats him. And we talked about those great matches at WrestleMania 10, the moments that kind of get overwhelmed, and Bret and his brother Owen are one of those moments. Go check it out in the archives. Fantastic match, and it opens up WrestleMania 10. But, you know, Bret would win that title, and then he goes into that feud with Owen afters, because Owen beats Bret at WrestleMania 10. I'm taking this over just a little bit, sorry, but I find this whole thing fascinating. I thought the storyline could have carried for a long time. Owen beats Bret at WrestleMania 10, but then Bret wins a title on the same night. And Owen's just looking at, like, at the end, comes out looking like, what the fuck just happened? You know, just I think it's awesome stuff. And then while they're feuding, Michaels goes into he gets Diesel as a sidekick, who we all know now as Kevin Nash, and they feud with Ramon for that IC title for much of '94. I know I'm covering a lot, just, you know, pick up where you want to and pick.
No, it's fine. Yeah,
pick the
keep on going.
You know, I just think it's phenomenal when you've got. You've got Bret and Owen
Shawn's growth. Shawn's growth happened a lot in '94. First of all, the ladder match
and his pull, right, by the way, yeah,
the ladder match from WrestleMania 10. What do you say? You know, they put Diesel with him. We all know where Kevin Nash's career kind of blew up from that. Kevin Nash we'll cover it later, but he would actually go on to win the world title before Michaels, which is odd. But Michaels was really learning, and he had some hiccups, and he had the whole, you know, where he got beat up by the Marines, and, you know, all this stuff, you know, that was later. But I mean, like, he got suspended at the end of '93 and you know, or after the summer of '93 for quote unquote failing a drug test. So Michaels had his bumps along the way, but more importantly, in '93, he established himself as people liked him. And he was starting to develop himself. And then we get in '94, like Dave's talking about, and he gets Diesel in his corner, which he did have Diesel in '93. But, like, you know, he left for a while, comes back, gets back with Diesel, and starts challenging Ramon. When he can't win the title from Ramon, he puts 6 Diesel on Ramon. Diesel actually wins the IC title from Ramon, but Michaels was in the mainstay of all that. So what Vince was doing was he's splitting it. He's trying to put Bret at the top in the world title picture against Owen, and the IC level was fucking Ramon, Nash, and Michaels. I mean, those 5 names, Jesus
phenomenal.
Christ. Like, he was trying to rebuild. In 94, he was really trying to rebuild his company and make those guys the big names of pro wrestling.
Crazy question,
long gone. In the WWF, long gone were the names of Hulk and Savage and Piper and, all those guys. And Vince was just trying to restart and kind of rejuvenate with youth and non-steroid guys in 94. Yeah. Go on, sorry.
Do you think, a crazy question came to me. Do you think he was testing Diesel to try to be the face of the company? Even though he did periodically, he finally did put the title on him, and he did it before Shawn. Do you think Vince was just trying to go back to that Land of the Giants?
Of course.
And use Mr. Vinny Vegas to do that?
100%.
Yeah, 100%. I find it phenomenal. But at the end of the day, Shawn, I like Kevin Nash. I do. I'm not shitting on him, and I think he did great things, and he changed the world of wrestling for good or bad. You can argue that. But I think Shawn just was way more charismatic, could carry way more. People were drawn to him more at that time. I mean, really, Kevin Nash was just so young there, in my opinion, too. So green to that world. Even though he'd been wrestling for a really long time, we've got some crazy stuff of him in the archives as the Wizard of Oz, right? Oz, but stuff that you didn't think he was doing. And he was massive, but he was not in that main title picture and can carry it as well as Shawn did, even though he won the title first. It's a lot of crazy stuff, So I love that, right? So, Shawn would get his first world title picture when he challenged Diesel for that title at WrestleMania 11, but he would lose, which is, I'm still like, wow, we're at WrestleMania 11 and Bret's a 2-time champ and Shawn hasn't even tasted that title yet, right? Shawn and Bret would continue to wrestle and feature matches, but Diesel was their world champion. So you can tell that Vince is really pushing, his big man persona, but it's not working. I think at this point, Jess, we've all come to the conclusion that they lost a lot of money here. They weren't drawing at this moment. It wasn't happening. And I know when we were younger and dumber, we blamed Bret for a lot of that. And I think wow, if they just let Bret and Shawn run, maybe they wouldn't have lost so much traction. I don't know. Thoughts on that? I'm
no,
here.
The thing is what Vince, and it's funny how powerful he is and how much influence Vince has had on the wrestling industry. And obviously he's probably one of the major reasons why most of the people even watch wrestling to begin with, Vince, because of his product and his people, his characters that he puts out there. But the thing is when mainstream is not interested in wrestling and the casual fan is not interested in wrestling, he is very uncomfortable just going with technical guys, which would please the fans that are left over. Like right now, Vince wants to push the Romans. I'm not saying Roman's a bad performer. Roman is not a bad performer.
He's very good.
He wants to push the Romans and the Brocks, and Brock serves his purpose too. But I'm saying is you could see Vince's. It's not, wrestling's not mainstream now, despite it being on Fox or whatever the fuck it's on. It's not. And Vince always says, well, what gets wrestling out of the non-mainstream and the non-casuals back into the boom period is I push big guys. No, a big guy will get over organically, and then you fan that flame from there. It's like he never learns. But when wrestling's down, you only have hardcore fans left, right? People that actually like pro wrestling. So you do need to gravitate toward the Shawns, the Bretts, the AJs, the Daniel Bryans, the Kurt Angles and all that. You do need to, because those are the people that are left over to watch your product. They like wrestling, so they like those talented guys. But Vince will always buck that. Back here was so obvious that he was doing that. He had Bret, he had Shawn, and then when Diesel came along, he's like, oh, here we go. And it's like, whoa. You were on the course in 94 to push the Bretts, the Owens, the Ramones, Ramone's a big guy, but he was a big character, right? And in the Shawns and all those guys. But yet the second Diesel comes along, everyone fucking move over, here we go. And it's like, oh God, like, Jesus Christ.
What's absolutely fascinating about that whole thing too is that the only reason why Diesel wins that title, the fact that Razor did not win a world title is fascinating on its face, but it's pretty obvious as to why, because in Vince's mind, it's still the land of faces. In WCW, the heels won the title and carried them for 90% of the time, and then the face would win, but then they'd start over, right? Months later, the face
which
would
is
lose
odd.
and
I'm
chase
glad
again.
you bring that up because I've been seeing that a lot on social media lately.
Yeah.
During the weak part of pro wrestling, which was like from 93 to like 96/7, I'm shocked that a 6'6", 6'7", 285-pound Razor Ramon didn't win the world title.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating.
He's the one guy when everyone else was like, "Oh, Piper should have won the title. Rude should have won the title.
Nobody
should have won the
talks
title."
about Razor.
I'm like, blah blah blah. No. But I'm like, when people say Razor, I'm like, I'm not really sure why not. Like, I'm not.
It
really
doesn't
sure.
make sense.
Yeah.
He wasn't in trouble with his. I know he had.
I know we're going off on a tangent from Brett.
No,
and Shawn,
I'm just saying. I know,
yeah.
but he was in this whole persona,
Mix,
this
yeah.
rivalry. He was wrestling, and the stuff he did with Shawn was fucking phenomenal, right? Razor's extremely talented for a big guy, and he was a heel. And in my opinion, it's the only reason why he didn't win a world title, and carry it. IC titles were for those heels or those smaller guys to see what they could do as a test.
But Ramon was a face when he won the IC title.
True, yeah. That's even more fascinating when you think about it. Yeah, they did turn Razor face, and their crowd still loved it, and they still never gave him that title opportunity. I find it's so strange to me, Jess. I've always thought about that. I'm like, how did that not happen? Somebody like that not winning the world title. I'd love to get, if you can get true Vince at that moment, say, why did that not happen? It looked like you had plans for him. Something changed. What was it? Was it his contract? Did you know because eventually they talk about, I'm leaving, I'm going to go, and take shorter dates and everything else. And you have curtain calls and you have all those other issues, right? But that's for another podcast. But Razor Ramon, gosh, he could have carried a title for a long time on a world level, heel or face, I think. In WCW at that time, Jess, if he was that hot, he would have won it. I mean,
yeah,
quite frankly. So, like I said, we're getting too far off, but Razor's a whole nother topic. I mean, that guy, a 4-time IC title champion, when that shit just didn't happen, they obviously had stock in him, but they never strapped the rocket to him. And I'd love to find out why that ever happened. That'd be a good question for those Conrad podcasts when they say ask us anything, right? Why did that not happen? So, but anyways, moving forward, let's see. Brett would defeat Diesel to win his third WWF title at Survivor Series in 95, but also Shawn would win his third IC title in July of 95 by defeating Jeff Jarrett. So you can still see they're paralleling, but they're not really wrestling each other too much. Just on those feature matches, right? Shawn wins the 96 Royal Rumble, was put on that course to face Brett at WrestleMania 12 in that 60-minute Iron match. Side note on this, by the way, I'm pretty sure one of our friends fell asleep at this match.
Yes, I was there live at WrestleMania 12, and I went with our friend Craig, and we were like second or third row from the very top of the arena. And it was a cool show. It was cool to say I went to a WrestleMania, even though it was only WrestleMania 12 at this point. But you know what? I know a lot of people praise the Iron Man match.
At the Pond, right, Jess?
Yeah, it was at the Pond.
So Anaheim Pond,
California.
it couldn't have sat more than 20,000 people. They were really hurting here. I mean, I'm sure they sold
the building was fairly full. I'd say the building was like 95% full, no problem. But it was a decent show. But like, I'm gonna be dead honest. Like an hour match is fucking boring. And back here they didn't put the bells and whistles. Like later in the Attitude Era, when they would do Iron Man matches, it would be like the outside interference, wrestlers going on the outside for a while. Here it was like fucking strictly in the ring. They went outside a couple times.
And not to mention, Jess, that there was no fucking pinfalls in that first 60 minutes.
No, that was the whole thing is they made sure Shawn and Brett were even, and nobody scored anything. So you had a full 60-minute match between these two guys with no pinfalls. It was just a flat out, and it was. Don't get me wrong, it takes major talent to pull that off, but Craig fell asleep right next to me. And it was kind of boring. I would say 80% of that match was boring, but they had high spots, they had bright spots where everybody was up on their feet, especially the last 5 minutes.
I think you're asking too much of two wrestlers at that point.
In 1996, yes, in a WWF crowd in 1996, yes, you were asking for way too much.
Wait a minute. Michael said he got it. He got all of it. Michael's got all of it. Michael's in a cover. 1, 2, go!
Agreed. I would never want to blame
especially
them for that.
after you just tried the year before to shove Diesel down my throat. And then now you're like, well, now we're going to go back to technical wrestlers and have an Iron Man 1 hour match. It's like, wait a minute. You can't go from fucking 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. You know, you tried these two guys. We liked them. You're like, fuck you, Diesel. And then Diesel didn't work out. So you put the title back on Bret. Now you're priming Shawn. And then you shove an Iron Man match down our throat. It's like, what, dude, you can't fucking jerk your audience around that many times in a year.
Which, by the way, Shawn wins that, by the way.
Yes.
After it goes into overtime. The overtime part's probably the best part.
So this was the second time that they clashed. I mean, again, they fought on a major pay-per-view the first time in Survivor Series 92. They did wrestle in dark matches and house shows for the IC title when Bret was IC champion back in 93 or 92. But that they never did an on television like a big.
Like I said, those are tester fillers.
Yeah, they never did like a really big television program with those two until they touched at Survivor Series 92. Now you fast forward to 1996, WrestleMania 12. Now they're fighting for the world title when they're kind of paralleling together all throughout 94 and 95, but not touching each other.
Yeah, agreed. And I think obviously too at the end of this, the reason why Shawn does win this title at WrestleMania 12 is because Bret's contract is up and he's trying to renegotiate it and taking time off. And he would actually return. He takes almost all of 96 off, but he returns at Survivor Series to face Austin, which I think we've all categorized in our minds as the greatest match ever. I mean, if it's hard.
Well, no, that was their WrestleMania 13 match, not the Survivor. But the Survivor Series match was really good, but that was not this match.
So maybe the rivalries, right? Yeah, but the WrestleMania match for the IC title, I believe, as well, right? At that time.
No.
At WrestleMania, it wasn't.
No.
I thought there was a title on the line.
For
crazy?
Bret and Austin.
Yeah, I thought.
No,
it was just straight up match.
Straight up match. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so out of control. But that's another, I don't want to say rivalry, but that is another kind of just match setup that I don't think people give credit to where credit is due with those two guys in there. Again, maybe more credit goes to Bret because Bret's just that good. I can't think of a match or a setup that Bret couldn't control or handle or make great. And he turned Austin into a star, over those couple of matches. So you got to look at that stuff, right? But all that while through 96, Shawn is your reigning WWF champion. But Jess, are they drawing money?
No, again, Vince was just trying with Shawn, and he put Jose Lothario with him in his corner, and he tried to make Shawn this really like bubblegum baby face like Vince likes to do. And Shawn's character is not really a bubblegummy baby face. He can be baby face, but like not the bubblegummy baby face. Not when he's fucking stripping and shit.
He was a baby face ahead of his time for the Attitude Era, which some people claim he kind of coined that term. But when wrestling got real with the Monday Night Wars, that's where a baby
the big thing with Shawn was the first half of his title reign in 96 was fine for what it was.
Sure.
But after the NWO took over in WCW in the late summer of 96, then it painfully became obvious that WWF was behind the times. They were trying to push bubblegum baby faces, have, these characters that were just super over the top and ridiculous, whereas NWO started hitting their stride and their success in WCW with just their first and last names and reality-based storylines. And these guys are really coming in from the crowd and they're fucking shit up. And this isn't pro wrestling. You're supposed to come down the aisle when you're a pro wrestler, not through the crowd. And so it was just wrestling fans were changing. They were demanding different stuff. And Shawn Michaels' title reign in 96 became instantly flat and farted loud.
Yeah, and again, probably not his fault. I mean, it's just
no, it wasn't. It was Vince's vision.
Place, wrong time.
Yeah, it was Vince's vision.
Yeah, and so they even have Sid Vicious defeat Shawn at Survivor Series to try to get sympathy for Shawn. Doesn't really work. And then Bret returns in late 96, and then you get that non-kayfabe, you get that shoot tension between Shawn and Bret, because now Shawn's been on top. He's got a taste of it now, right? And Shawn doesn't give a shit what's strong and what's not. Shawn's like, I'm the man. You have to respect Shawn for that at least. A lot of people get pissed at Shawn for what he may have done or what he may have said. There's a lot of bullshit about what may or may not have happened in the locker room and back behind the scenes and his control and blah, blah, blah. But one thing that Shawn wasn't, he wasn't shy about shit. And he's like, I'm the man. I don't care what your gate says. I don't care what your ratings say. I'm your guy. And I think Shawn was always like that. You got to respect that. And the thing is, I think Bret's that way too. Bret's gotten to the point like, well, who else is going to carry this for you? And at this point, you got two major talented guys, technically sound guys that can wrestle with just about anybody at any given time and make anybody look good. And they're both like, no, I'm the guy.
Yeah, now this is where it crosses from their on-screen rival to behind the scenes. Now they're rivaling behind the scenes, and they're fighting for Vince's attention.
Exactly right. And that's kind of what it goes. And Bret actually signs a 20-year contract at this point because Vince was scared of him going to WCW, which in hindsight, it's what sparks something just tragic in 97. But
that really started the end of 96 when Bret came back and did that. That started the whole wheels falling off the bus. And we're going to get to it, but it led to the whole catastrophic events of Survivor Series 97 in Canada.
Yeah. And we're going to get into it. Like 97 is the year of the screw job, right? Shawn defeated Sid to regain that championship at Royal Rumble 97. And then he loses his smile. It's funny how it's all just kind of, it's perfectly set up for the ultimate catastrophe, right? So Shawn loses his smile and has to forfeit the title. And then Bret has his classic match with Austin at 13. He turns heel. That's the double heel turn. That's, right. And he forms a heel faction with Davey, Owen, Brian Pillman, Jim Neidhart. They form the new foundation, but it's the Hart Foundation, right? And then he wins that title at SummerSlam of said year from Undertaker. So where did Taker win it from? Did he take it?
He beat Sid at WrestleMania 13 in 97.
So that was was that just where the title was up for grabs? None of them had it because
Sid was champion. Yeah, what happened was Shawn Michaels beat Sid, and then Shawn lost his smile, so he had to forfeit the title. And again, this was Shawn's.
So did they give it back to Sid, or Sid won it back?
Sid won it back. They put the title up in the Fatal 4-Way match in February of In Your House, and it was like Austin, Vader, Taker, and Bret. Bret actually won it back, and then the next night, Sid beats Bret. Because Austin screwed him out of the title.
That's fun. So
they had a back and forth. And they were. I did enjoy this because I felt like they were just WWF was trying at least. They were trying to get our attention. I don't like hot potato titles, but at the same time, Michaels, he played that. He lost his smile. That's a politic game. That's a move he made back behind the scenes to Vince to be like, you either like Bret or you like me. These guys, since, we heard that Bret signed the 20-year contract, were behind the scenes trying to be the most attractive person to Vince. And which is funny because, Vince has always been looking out for the next mainstream guy. You know what I mean? Like the next Hulk or the next whatever. That's what Vince is always looking out for. But these guys, unfortunately, were just vying for his attention when Vince never... To me, he showed evidence back when he put the title on Diesel. You had Bret and Shawn in the palm of your hands, and he's like, "Oh, here comes Diesel. Fuck you guys." And they didn't see that back then. Vince has always been like that. But yet they just still tried to vie for Vince's attention. I lost my smile. I'm injured. I might retire. I got to go. Okay, he's not really that injured. He knew that. And Bret, same thing. Well, I'm going to go to WCW. Well, what do you want? I want a lifetime job. 20 years, pal. Blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of, Vince was just throwing them bones and all that stuff. But Vince in his mind is like, the second the next Hulk comes around, I'm going with him. I'm going with that person. And they just never saw it coming. So
quite frankly, it never really came around either until Austin.
This whole 97 was Vince knew very well what the tensions were between Bret and Shawn, and he allowed it to fester because Vince knew that someone will remain standing and someone won't remain standing. And again, keep pushing on because in the end,
test a character of metal, is it not?
In the end, they both fell.
Yeah, and Vince is responsible for a lot of that, and he would probably admit that to this day. But he wanted to see what could happen. And here's my question, Jess. I mean, when this is happening, and you see someone like Austin catching fire at this point, because for what we talked about, Austin's already won King of the Ring. Am I correct on the timeline?
Yes. When Austin won it a year before.
White hot. Right?
He lost it a year before. When Austin got dropped on his head at SummerSlam '97 by Owen. And the crowd started going nuts for Austin. Vince knew right then, like, this is my guy. I pray to God that he could get healthy. I hope he gets cleared because if his neck injury isn't as bad, even though it was super severe, but if he can get cleared by a doctor, like, and come back, Austin is my guy. Yeah, Austin's my guy. So, and Shawn and Bret, either they picked up on that and that fueled their fire even more because they were even more jealous of now a third entity, or they didn't see it and they were still thinking that Vince is going to look at either me or Shawn, one of the two. And that's the thing, is like, once Austin proved that he was the guy, and after he got dropped on his head, when Vince, quote unquote, went out in character and said, for insurance reason, we can't allow you to wrestle. And then all of the crowd got behind Austin. NWO is beating their fucking ass, like in 97, like a drum. Yeah. But at the end of 97, WWF started to get unique storylines. Austin started to catch fire. Vince felt it. And he's like, this is my guy. This is my guy, Austin. And Bret and Shawn were in the middle of fighting each other. They just didn't either they didn't notice it or they totally noticed it. Either way, it kept them going at each other to get Vince's attention. It's super. I know it's been talked about to death, the whole leading up to the Montreal Screwjob.
But it's fascinating.
But it's super fucking fascinating because it's a fake sport. And I know people don't like that word fake, but I mean, it is. Let's just say, for layman's terms, it's fake. But yet these guys are vying for position, much like somebody would in a company or an actor would for a leading role versus a supporting role or whatever. That's what wrestling is. That's what's so awesome and interesting about pro wrestling, is like, it's like an acting job, or you're still trying to outperform the other person. Even though you might be working with them, you're still trying to outperform them because you want that lead role, or you want that starting spot, or you want that promotion at work and become the CEO of the division or whatever. Like, that's what wrestling is. So these guys were so enthralled with fighting each other, thinking that it's either me or so-and-so. It's either one of the two of us, Shawn or Bret, that Vince is just kind of like, just like when Diesel came along, and he was wrong about Diesel, but just when Diesel came along, Austin comes along, and he's like, look at that pretty new girl in school. And that was it. That's all. Vince has always been like that. And they just couldn't see it because they were so enthralled in it. They were Bret thought he was safe because he had a 20-year deal. And Shawn thought he was safe because I've told Vince to fuck you to his face, and he still likes me. He still appreciates my idea and my talent. So they both were thinking they were invincible.
Yeah, and certainly they were not, because Shawn eventually comes back. He turns heel. Now you have two of these mainstay guys heel with factions. With you got the Hart Foundation with Bret, and you've got D-Generation X with Shawn. And when you think about that storyline on its face, there's no way these guys are going to cross paths again for some time, until the fact that Vince starts to realize that I can't honor your contract for 20 years. I just can't do it. I just don't know what to do there. And this is where it all gets speculated, but even, Bret seems to say, like, yeah, use my stuff against WCW to get yourself more money at WCW. And Bret basically signs a pretty decent deal with WCW. Probably, I want to say triple. A very good deal. Yeah. I think it was like triple the cash over a 3-year period that Vince was going to pay him. And he's like,
I want to say Bret's base was like $3 million a year for 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. So he was getting over $9 million a year over that 3-year period. And the 3-year period with Vince was not, I don't even think it was 3 total. Yeah, because it was a long-term contract. So
it descended, like, after a while, Bret would retire. It covered Bret going from the ring into the, backstage, where he'd be like an agent, and then he would be like in the office or whatever. So it covered Bret's entire career. So the pay kind of lessened.
I don't even know how great wrestling could have been if he was in that back all that time for 20 years. But we can always think about it, what could have been. So when that happens, Bret takes that deal with WCW, but guess what? Who still has the title, Jess?
Bret does.
Yeah. And at this point, it was so poorly planned. I mean, I think even Vince would say, yeah, it was bad timing, whatever. Never thought of a way to get this off Bret before they go to Canada. And guess what? Bret is not only very proud, but he also feels like he can do what he wants. He has all the power. He has the title. And he says, I'm not losing the title in fucking Canada, which is where Survivor Series in 97 actually takes place, right? In Montreal. So you know, you guys.
We're not going to cover it. Long story short, the
not
screw
going to
job
cover
happens.
it. But that's where the Montreal Screwjob comes in. Like, go watch. You know, all the fucking details on it, the documentaries on it. They're everywhere, and they're fascinating.
Yeah, Bret and Vince agree on a disqualification finish, and Bret was going to drop the title some other way later. However, Vince actually came down to the ring and called for the bell and made it look like Bret submitted in his own hold when Shawn had him in the sharpshooter, and put the belt on Shawn. It was a whole conspiracy against Bret. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole thing. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, it was a work. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a work. But the thing is like, I don't want to cover the thing. It ended their feud, but the big rivalry to me was Shawn and Bret. And I always found this fascinating, was Vince always chose Shawn in the end. It's so weird to me that Bret, to me, was a better, well-rounded performer in the ring. And Bret understands pro wrestling. Not that Shawn didn't, but Shawn knew how to make himself look good, and he knew how to sell and do all that. And Shawn's fantastic and talented, despite my feelings of him. But Bret, to me, was the well-rounded wrestler. Vince just knew that Shawn is a hothead. I can control hotheads. But Bret,
Stone Cold's a hothead.
But Bret, I think, was super calculated in the sense that he knew how to keep himself in the main event picture, or if you're not going to put me in the main event picture, you're going to pay contract-wise out of your ass for me. And I think Vince feared that. So Vince is like, I'd rather get rid of you and keep Shawn because I'll neuter Shawn. Austin's my guy. That's it. Like, in the end of 97, beginning of 98, Austin was so obvious that he was the next coming, the second coming. And Bret would be smart backstage contract wise to keep himself relevant. And Vince did not like that because he knew the wrestling landscape was changing. And in order to compete with WCW, he had to be edgy and different. He didn't want Bret sticking around because Bret would find a way to hold on financially, contractually, behind the scenes. Michaels was just a hothead. And Vince is like, I can control a teenager. That's no problem.
Bret's really smart though in the back.
But this other guy, I don't want. He whines, he cries, but he's smart backstage and he knows how to trap me into contracts and shit. I don't like that. So I'd rather him go to WCW, and I'm going to keep this whiner, and I'm going to say it, this druggie, this guy that obviously is kind of spiraling downhill. He's paranoid. He's this, he's that. I'm going to keep him because I will keep him in check. It's no problem. And that's what ended up happening. And then he ended up dumping Shawn because Shawn ended up retiring after WrestleMania when he lost to Austin because he was all mad and butthurt and shit and on drugs and pain pills, and he couldn't keep his shit together. So Vince got his way. He knew I had to contractually and intelligently behind the scenes get rid of Bret, but just Shawn will take care of himself. And that's what ended up happening. So this Bret and Shawn rival ended with a disgusting thud in Canada, Montreal, Survivor Series 97 with the screw job. And it's just kind of like, wow, these guys were the two that Vince were using to try to repair wrestling when the steroid era was being ushered out. And he was trying to figure out his new audience and the direction of his company in 92, 93, 94, 95. And like, it's just kind of crazy the way, again, in the long run, he always goes for the mainstream guys, the guys that attract the casual fans like Hogan, Austin, the big guys. He tried with Diesel, but it didn't work. But he tried because Diesel was 7 feet tall, 300 and whatever pounds, you know? And it's like, it's so funny. That's always been Vince's motto. But yet, and he'll try technical wrestlers every now and then, like Benoit and Guerrero, but he'll always get out of it and go with the guys that looked different. Even though Cena wasn't tall, Cena was super muscular and different looking. And so he went with Cena. And it's just kind of like it. Vince has always been like that. And these two guys fought with each other so blindly. And it was right on them. It fell right in their laps that Vince doesn't give a shit about either one of us, but they kept fighting at each other till the very end. And both of them fell. So weird, so crazy, so interesting to me. So interesting.
I think I'm cute. I know I'm sexy. I've got the looks that drives a girl. What happened? I've got the moves that really move her. I said, what happened? Bret Hart gave up on the sharpshooter. Just a sexy boy. I'm not your boy toy. Shawn Michaels. Just a sexy boy.
There's so many things like what could have happened. It makes you wonder if Bret had punched him 6 months sooner in the face, would Vince have changed his mind? Well, now Bret's the hothead and I can control him. Like Bret never did that until he ultimately got screwed and he was on his way out. That's the only time he ever lost it and punched Vince square in the mouth and knocked him out. But I think Shawn was on the verge of that every day. Shawn was always like that.
But I think Vince knew he was safer against Shawn than he was Bret for some reason. I think that Bret, to me, clearly was the better in-ring performer, well-roundedness is concerned. And
you can
Michaels,
argue that
don't
Bret
get me
was
wrong,
the smarter person.
Michaels is a great performer. Do not get me wrong. But yeah,
amazing.
Vince just felt he could control Michaels. He felt Michaels was less mentally than Bret was. Not intelligence-wise, but mentally. Like, Michaels was just a fucking teenager. I fucking hate you, Dad. Like, that was Michaels. Whereas Bret was like, okay, I see you're leaning towards this way, so I will stay with you, but you have to give me this. And Vince is like, shit, I don't like that. I do not like somebody cornering me, like, privately and contractual, with a contract and legally. He feared Bret more. I'm not even saying Bret was a genius or made all the right choices, but I believe that's why he chose Shawn over Bret, because on the surface, he could control Shawn far more than he could control Bret.
And it's not to say that, Shawn was mindless. It was just easier because they're both pretty dynamic guys. I'll tell you something else. I think when you look at the absolute moment of it, and I'm not trying to disparage these guys, but I think this is really how Vince probably felt at the time. These guys are pure placeholders until I find my next guy. And by the way, he did find his next guys. He found Austin, he found The Rock, and Taker was always waiting in the wings whenever needed.
But Taker was never greedy. Taker always was a company guy.
Sure.
So when Vince put him in the middle of the card, and Vince is like, listen, I want to develop a different world champion, but I want to keep you in the middle of the card because you're an attraction as well. I don't have to put the title on you. So Mark or Undertaker.
Taker was the epitome of
he was like, sounds good, you're right. So Vince and Taker always got along behind the scenes creatively because they understood each other, and
you also know Taker was getting paid. It's all
yeah, and Undertaker never posed any problems. So that was the difference. And Shawn and Bret never saw that. They just fought and fought.
That's why Taker's still around, and he was.
Yeah, they thought Vince left. I have to beat this other person to win Vince's love or his respect or his admiration, and that's not what Vince wanted. Vince wanted just people to stay in their place and not fucking be so loud.
Stay in your lane, let the story handle.
Yeah, and it's like. So on the surface, he always chose Shawn, but I realize now in talking about this that it was because I think it was easier to corral Shawn, even though Shawn was the louder one. He was always fuck you, Vince, and fuck us. He was always a loud teenager, but Vince knew that's not damaging to me.
I can handle that.
Yeah,
Vince could always handle someone getting in his face and screaming at him. Vince doesn't care about that. He's very conflictual in himself. But here's where I'm going with it: the fact that these guys were looked at placeholders, but the only reason at that time, but they were not placeholders. Bret and Shawn changed wrestling in the realm of how it is today.
And they did indirectly, with or without Vince's blessing, they did.
Oh,
and they were both indirect. They were both directly responsible for the rise of Austin, and they didn't even know it. Maybe they did. And they just didn't care because it just became about each guy beating each other.
When Bret came back, who's the first person he wanted to wrestle?
Yeah, it was Bret understood what Austin was, but I think that Bret still thought I'm the number one guy.
I can use
so yeah. As wrestling gets popular again, I'm going to be regarded as the number one guy, not realizing that wrestling's getting popular again because a different entity is rising to the top. So Bret just never saw. And I think Bret got the feeling that the sport was passing him by, which is why he turned heel to begin with in '97. Because behind the scenes, Bret really hated the fans for booing faces and cheering heels. He couldn't understand that. He didn't understand why
he was behind in that, but it also became his best work, like you said before.
Yeah, kind of indirectly. So Bret was a little out of touch as far as like he just wanted faces to be faces and heels to be heels. Michaels wanted the edge, but Michaels just felt like I'm going to scream and be fucking super loud to get my way. Whereas Bret's like, no, I don't like what the wrestling crowd wants, but like I'm going to secure my spot behind the stage contractually, so I'm fine with that, and I'll do whatever. Even though I don't know if Bret ever thought that the Hart Foundation was his best work, because it was. '97 Bret Hart was the best Bret Hart. to me in the ring
faction of the foundation
in the ring and on the mic, and I think that was the best fucking Bret Hart, man. And ironically, it was the best Michaels starting DX. So competition works, whether it's company versus company or person versus person within the same company. But like they just didn't see the ending, and the ending was not going to favor either one of them. So instead of just trying to save, which Bret, I think, was behind the scenes trying to prep for his future, knowing that eventually he'd be thrown out, I think he got so distracted with the feud with Michaels behind the scenes and vying for Vince's attention and admiration and love that I think that he forgot what he was there for. I think that's what got Bret. And I think Michaels never saw it coming because he was just I'm being loud and Vince tolerates me, so he loves me.
Well, it's funny because wrestling never really ends, right? It just ends for you.
Yeah,
whoever you are.
Yes.
Right. The NFL never ends. It's just your days are over. We don't. Some of us get told by high school that we're done with whatever we're doing in sports. Some people get told by 40 they're done, but we're all told. It's kind of like that famous Billy Bean line, right? We're all told eventually, that we can't do this anymore. And at that level, that's when they were told. But I don't think people at that time really understood what they did and the impact they had.
And it's easy for us to talk about this too. And we briefly mentioned on it, what WCW was doing on the other side at the end of 96 and all through 97, completely factored in to Vince having to have this feast or famine, attitude in the locker room. And Vince nurtured the fight because I think he knew something, it's got to blow up before I can rebuild it. Right. And so it was just kind of I think Vince wanted this, to end the steroid era. I think he wished a blow up happened, but it never happened. It just ended up happening in 97, where it just fucking imploded. And then here comes Austin, and Bret and Shawn are just so busy baby slapping each other that I'm going to rebuild my kingdom. And that's what ended up happening. And I'm just so interested in the Bret and Shawn rival because it had so many different layers to it. And it went through this year. 1997 was this year in wrestling that to me is like in a time capsule or a bubble, because everything that happened in 97 meant so much to the future and what would develop in the Monday Night Wars and what would happen after the Monday Night Wars. And it was this feud kind of was in the center of this whole change for me as a fan. When I saw it, I didn't realize it until after it happened, where I was like, God, that was everything that happened in 97 on both sides, WCW and WWF, was so fucking pivotal. It had to have happened that way for the result to end up happening the way it did. But God, you look back now and you're like, it was so obvious,
So what we're basically saying here, guys, is that 1997 is the year where the curtain gets pulled completely back.
It was the year of change, man. It was the year of...
We see the twig and berries underneath. We see... I hate to go back to Oz because we make fun of the whole Oz reference, but if you look at the movie Oz, they think Oz is this all-powerful, magical being, and then they pull the curtain back, and you see some little fucker back there controlling all the shit. This is where the curtain was pulled back for just about everybody was in the realm of 1997.
Because, the Mr. McMahon character became a thing. It became it spilled onto the screen.
And we saw reality in wrestling, and we'll never be able to go back. So that's the key, is the end of the day, the curtain was pulled back in the year of 1997.
And it all was, to me, it was all from the Bret and Shawn rivalry.
As always, you can reach us via Instagram at O.W.P 2019, SoundCloud at Our Wrestling Podcast, YouTube at Our Wrestling Channel, or just do the easy thing, download the app WrestlePost at no charge to you and join us along with other great podcasts of the day. This is Dave and Jess with the O.W.P signing off. Have a good one.